In the creation stage, again, I think that you need to write on your own first. Writing is thinking. It's how we figure out the things that we should be writing about. It's how we understand the things that we shouldn't be writing about, new ideas and directions we want to explore. However, when you're, say, have a really big asset like a book and you want to figure out, okay, what are different types of derivative content I can make? How could I translate this chapter into a LinkedIn carousel? AI can be really, really powerful there. And then on refinement, that's bringing the voice of your audience into the room, creating synthetic personas where you basically teach the AI everything about the audience you're trying to reach, and then have it kind of act as that audience and give you feedback on what you're writing. I find that can be really effective because it just gets you out of your own head, right? It brings in a different perspective. It's like having, that voice of the customer in the room. Of course, it's not as good as getting it from a real life human being, but especially when you have multiple different audiences you're trying to reach, it can be really, really effective.
You know that storytelling is the most powerful tool you have to grow your business and your career. And if you've been wondering how it holds up against the rise of AI, the answer might just surprise you. But most professionals are quietly terrified that AI is coming for their creativity, their voice, their value, because nobody has shown them the science that proves why the machines can't touch what only humans can do. Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell. Today I'm joined by Joe Lazer, CMO of Pepper, co-founder of Contently, and author of the new book, Super Skill: Why Storytelling is the Superpower of the AI Age. Joe has spent 5 years inside AI companies researching exactly this question, and his answer will change how you think about your future. You'll discover the 4 story elements that make any audience stop and listen, why vulnerability is the most underrated business skill, and how to use AI as an amplifier without ever letting it replace your voice. Hey, Joe, welcome to the show.
Park, thanks for having me.
Coming to us all the way from New York, New Jersey, somewhere around there. Where are you?
I'm in Brooklyn, in the heart of Brooklyn. So a few blocks from Barclays Center, where the Nets play. That's going to orient you. And in Park Slope, it's sort of the suburbia of Brooklyn. Tree-lined streets, lots of strollers, dog and a baby. One day you just wake up in your 30s in New York and you've transported from Manhattan to Park Slope, Boerum Hill, where I am right now. And yeah, it's lovely.
Very cool.
Got a 6-degree day today.
There, right?
I grew up in Jersey, just about 25 minutes over the river. So I cannot call myself a truly native New Yorker. Truly native New Yorkers would be angry about that designation. But I had a little short bus that called the Spanish Express that would stop in front of my house and get in the city in 20 minutes. So I had an easier commute to Manhattan than a lot of people in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. But I've been here in the city for, about almost 20 years now. So I love it. Yeah, greatest city in the world.
And you've got this new book out, Super Skill: Why Storytelling is the Superpower of the AI Age. And before we get to that...
Well, Super Skill, actually, I think you just called it Super Kill. You said Super Kill, which would be a much different type of book.
That ain't bad.
Yeah, that's my murder mystery follow-up to this book is Super Kill. It's about a dog with superpowers that goes on a serial killing rampage and discovers how to really find a new profession in the age of AI.
I love it. I think there's an audience for that. And, really, you're trying to super kill AI or people's fear about AI. Yeah. And instead of, that's going to come and take your job and strangle you to death, how you can actually use it to grow your career and your business and everything else. So, Super Skill. Thanks for catching me on that.
No worries.
So how did you get into the storytelling world?
Man, that's a great question. When do we become a storyteller? I mean, I think we're all storytellers when we're young, right? I have a 3-year-old here in Brooklyn right now, and he spends 98% of his time, his existence in Neverland, only about 2% actually operating in reality. I'll be like, we have to go to school. He's like, we're building an airplane. I'm like, okay, but we actually have to get to school. I need to get to work. So I think we're all born storytellers, but for me, the eureka moment as a storyteller and a writer was when I was in my sophomore year of high school, and we got assigned this really fun assignment to write a bonus chapter in Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle, which is one of my favorite Vonnegut books. And so I've been a pretty bad student up to that point, I would say, fairly delinquent. But I got this assignment where you can write just a bonus chapter in the middle of it. So I wrote like chapter 16 and a half. And then after I handed it in, I got called up by my sophomore year English teacher. And she always had kind of this stern look on her face. And she called me up and I was like, crap, I'm in trouble again. I used a couple of curse words in that chapter. Like, I'm going to get sent to the principal's office. Like, And then she was like, I loved your chapter. Can you read it in front of the class? And I was super nervous, right? But I get up there and I start reading the chapter. Hands are shaking, whole body shaking. I start getting into it. And, the class just starts bursting out laughing like they loved it. And that was just this moment of connection for me, right? Where I was like, oh, I love this feeling. And like, I really enjoyed doing this. So from that, I wrote a terrible novel when I was in high school. I joined up on the high school paper, ran the news section as the news editor, also wrote a couple of back page columns, humor columns that were pretty popular at my high school. And it just snowballed from there, ran the college newspaper, got into journalism, took a lot of creative writing at Sarah Lawrence, which is basically an MFA program as an undergrad. Started a media company coming out of college, went and built Contently, which is one of the first big content marketing companies, and kind of pioneered the brand storytelling space. And, I've been writing books and writing newsletters and essays and just obsessed with the science of storytelling ever since. That's been a really strong through line through both of my books, The Storytelling Edge, which became a bit of a cult classic in the content marketing industry, and then Super Skill, where I've combined both a lot of the research around the neuroscience and behavioral science of storytelling that I've been doing over the past decade with a lot of my research around AI that I've been doing as an executive at AI companies over the last 5 years.
Gotcha. Sarah Lawrence, isn't that where Joseph Campbell taught for many, many years? The
It is
creator of the hero's journey?
Yeah, it's where he pioneered the hero's journey. A big part of the curriculum there. The sports center is named after him. So yeah, that's kind of the tradition of Sarah Lawrence. Some of just the best writers and writing professors you'll meet in 15-person seminars where you're just sitting around a round table and tearing apart each other's stories. It's a little bit vicious, but it was where I was forged in the fires of those seminars, having, my papers marked up by editors and writers and novelists that I really admire, my short stories, my essays. It's where I learned to write. It's where I learned to edit through that process. It's where I learned to think in a lot of ways, right? Because writing is thinking, and the act of writing a lot. Everything at Sarah Lawrence is writing based. There's no tests, essentially. Everything is a 30-page thesis, right? And I think that's what ends up pulling out a lot of the cognitive super skills that are becoming more important now at work. As AI is able to do coding and data analysis, we need to be questioning what's our true human edge and where can we stand out in the age of the machines.
You said that the sports complex there is named after Joseph Campbell?
It is, yeah.
That
He was a big
cracked
sports
me up.
Yeah, he was a
What?
big sports guy apparently. Yeah, like
Okay.
he was like very into the sports there. Listen, there are sports at Sarah Lawrence. I founded the Ultimate Frisbee team. I had a pretty good soccer team. Swimming is strong there. It's all D3. I did cover the basketball team. The basketball team was not great. Our center was like 6 feet tall. It was like the tallest person on the team. We were mostly playing cooking schools, but there
Fair
was
enough.
basketball. It was maybe
Yeah.
a crowd of 40 people there in the
Yeah,
Joseph Campbell Sports Center.
I just think of him as that, that very esoteric story guy that, boy, you read A Hero with a Thousand Faces, it's hard to get through. But he's so brilliant that I just can't picture a sports center after. But I digress. I didn't
Yeah.
know they had that out there. So your new book, you begin with a story about your son, Max.
Hmm.
And I was just kind of curious how you found the connection between the moment of what was happening in that story and how you played that into Chat GPT, AI, and storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, it's the story of why I wrote the book. So, my son Max was born a few days after ChatGPT came into the world, and in that early light of fatherhood, as I got back to my apartment here in Brooklyn, and I had a little short paternity leave from my job running marketing at a fast-growing AI startup, I really started seeing the explosion of the analysis around AI, right? Like once ChatGPT dropped, like I saw it, I worked at an AI startup. My team had been using generative AI tools even before ChatGPT. But it was this moment when it started to spread in those days and weeks after, right? Where it felt like aliens had landed on Earth and they suddenly were really eager to write blog posts for us, where we had all of these prophecies that AI was going to wipe out writers and creatives, that the thing that I'd based my career on was gone for good. And I wondered, what would this mean for me as a new father who had a mortgage to pay? What would this mean for my son? Would he grow up in this beige world without human storytellers and creativity? Because everyone out there on LinkedIn, all the analysts, McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture, were predicting that AI was going to wipe out content teams to automate creativity and storytelling. But one thing I've learned in covering tech as, a journalist over the last 15 years is that our first narrative and impression of new technology usually isn't quite right. Like think about how
Again,
badly we got social media, right? It was originally going to be this bringer of democracy over the world, this inherent good of connection. And in a lot of ways, it's just divide us apart and become a mechanism for data aggregation and selling and, a surveillance of us as human beings. Um, and so as I started to dig into this fundamental question I had, right? What was going to be the disruption of AI in the future of work? What skills would matter most? I had a really key advantage, which is that I was running marketing at a company called A Team. We just raised 55 million with around this idea of using machine learning to bring together high performing teams of product engineering, design, and marketing talent to build and launch new products for both startups and big enterprise brands. So sort of inherent to our thought leadership was understanding how AI was going to change what skills were most important in the next stage of work. So I started this generative AI salon series in downtown New York, and started bringing in and talking to a ton of AI researchers, corporate leaders, future of work researchers, talking to them both on the record, off the record, doing a ton of interviews because my marketing programs are always really built around events and thought leadership. So it became a really good excuse to try and answer this burning question that I had, right, about how things were going to shape out. And at the time, around midpoint of 2023, started to have two key realizations from all that reporting and research, which that AI slop was going to proliferate online. We're going to see more and more people creating this very mediocre content using AI, creating the sea of sameness. That in turn would drive down the cost of creating mediocre content, but it also would drive down the value of mediocre content, which in turn would have this counterintuitive effect of increasing the value of great human storytellers that people would just naturally gravitate to, was my prediction and thought, right? Which is, I think, part of what we're seeing now. Because as human beings, everything that I've learned studying the behavioral science and the neuroscience of storytelling told me that we really crave that human connection that feels authentic and genuine. And AI was very likely to be a force against that, right? And so we would seek out those human storytellers. And the second is, as I talked to the AI researchers and future work researchers, it became increasingly apparent that as AI progressed, it was going to get better at technical tasks like coding and data analysis faster than it would at storytelling for a couple of reasons. One is because of how the models are trained. It's much easier to objectively define success on coding, right? You build the app works, or data analysis, the math is correct, than it is storytelling and connection, which is much more subjective and harder to measure. And the second is just the economic incentives around it, right? There's a lot more money in replacing coders than writers, and there's a certain level of getting AI as a writer that becomes economically valued from a business sense. Like, it's part of why AI is really good at that jargony business speak. It's actually how it's trained and fine-tuned, and it's based on what the data set looks like as well, because that is really what becomes economically valuable for businesses. Can you write a professional email? Can you write landing page copy where the gross little CTAs are in all the right places? That's what becomes valuable. But pure creative human expression becomes less the realm of AI. And so factoring in these two forces in a world where it's harder to buy attention than ever, where slop was going to flood the web, human storytellers would grow in value. And simultaneously, as AI progressed, it was going to take on those technical tasks, forcing us to ask this question of what's our human edge? And that's all the relational work that matters most, right? All of the soft skills, empathy, communication, leadership, collaboration that allow us to move and rally other human beings. AI can code and do data analysis. It can do a lot of the work that we do on the computer, but it can't convince 6 different stakeholders to rally around an idea. It can't inspire a team. It can't build a culture. So even past just marketing, those storytelling skills become more important at work. And so when I first came up with this thesis in 2023, most people thought I was nuts because the prevailing narrative was tied to our anchoring bias that AI was going to replace writers and creatives the most. I think now we're seeing, as this book has come out, more people kind of jumping on this idea as we've seen, roles for storytellers double in the past year, according to LinkedIn data, as we've seen, these massive salaries at companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and Netflix for product storytelling roles exceeding $500,000 a year from tech brands that adopted AI first, right? Saw that the slop didn't work and now are realizing that the real way to drive growth and win the category creation battle online is to have great human storytellers who can both tell stories and use AI to tell stories in a way that cuts through the slop and really stands out.
Mm. As a storyteller, how do you use AI?
Yeah, so I have a hard rule, which I don't use AI to write, and that's a promise and a social contract that I have with my audience. People read my books between LinkedIn and Substack. I have a couple 100,000 newsletter subscribers. My contract with them is that I am not going to serve them up something that was just generated by, ChatGPT or Claude.
But you must use it just for efficiency somehow.
Yes.
You would never let slop go out. I get that. But how do you use it to amplify your work?
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that up front. But how do I use AI? I use AI every single day. I have found it to be incredibly helpful in scaling what I'm able to do. So in the book, in the last part, Upgrade, I talk about using AI in your storytelling practice in kind of 3 levels. And this is very much how I use it. The first is automate. So there's so much busy work and shallow work in our day-to-day lives. Things where we're not really cognitively engaged, we're just checking the box, but they're tedious tasks. And I think the beauty of AI is the ability to automate so many of those things now, right? To use AI as essentially an executive assistant. I have Claude Cowork set up of organizing my computer, my files, my life, understanding my calendar, my inbox, what I need to prioritize, what I need to respond to. It's just really, really powerful in that way. There's also a lot of sort of derivative content, right? That's not really coming from me, but at work, AI is quite good at doing things like landing page copy, CTAs, right? Metadata on different things that would take a lot of time before that now you can do much more quickly. I'm redesigning my website using AI, able to basically take inspiration and vibe code in a website that otherwise would have taken me months to develop. All of those things that are away from the core thing that I love doing, which is researching and reporting and telling stories, that I'm able to leverage AI to get off my plate. The second stage is iterate. And in this section, I talked about a few different frameworks, but one is what I call the thought leadership loop for AI, which is this cycle of ideation, research, creation, and refinement with AI. So starting with using AI as an ideation partner. Now, the key here really is the order in which you use AI. If you use AI first for brainstorming, you're very likely to anchor at AI ideas, and you're going to see some amount of cognitive atrophy. You're not going to be as creative or engaged. You're going to produce very average ideas. But if you brainstorm on your own first around something, and then you get to this point where you're stuck or you need additional ideas, AI can be really powerful. And this is just because of the way that creativity and brainstorming actually works for us as human beings. We don't come up with ideas in these big eureka leaps, right? Instead, we actually come up with ideas in these small iterative steps of creativity. So idea A spurs idea B, spurs idea C. And AI is actually really good at unlocking this brainstorming dynamic because it's like having 1,000 interns in a room who can suggest different ideas from you. And often the ideas that it suggests won't be the one that you choose, right? But it's going to inspire another idea that just gets you there quicker. It's a really big unlock. I use AI research a ton. I think that deep research is the best use case that we've seen from AI so far. It's getting better. It hallucinates much less than it used to. You have to check all the sources that it's giving, but if you're giving AI the right context, the right instructions, telling it to use very specific types of sources, academic studies, journals, highly reputable publishers, have it cite in the right way so it's very easy for you to check whether it is giving you the right information or not, it can be just such a time saver. It's like having a research assistant there. And it's something that I used a fair amount in writing the book, especially things like where I didn't have first party interview, right? But say I want to do something like check a really obscure podcast transcript for something really interesting that a founder or writer had said in the past. But previously that would taken me dozens of hours to do it, have to listen to all of them, or just on a shot in the dark that this is going to be the example that I need. But AI can go through, it can crawl those transcripts, right, that have been published online or in show notes on YouTube, and it could find the quote or the example I need. Like, that's just an example of the really big unlock you can get there. In the creation stage, again, I think that you need to write on your own first. Writing is thinking. It's how we figure out the things that we should be writing about. It's how we understand the things that we shouldn't be writing about, new ideas and directions we want to explore. However, when you're, say, have a really big asset like a book and you want to figure out, okay, what are different types of derivative content I can make? How could I translate this chapter into a LinkedIn carousel? Like, AI can be really, really powerful there. And then on refinement, that's bringing the voice of your audience into the room, creating synthetic personas where you basically teach the AI everything about the audience you're trying to reach, and then have it kind of act as that audience and give you feedback on what you're writing. I find that can be really effective because it just gets you out of your own head, right? It brings in a different perspective. It's like having, that voice of the customer in the room. Of course, it's not as good as getting it from a real life human being, but especially when you have multiple different audiences you're trying to reach, it can be really, really effective. So those 4 stages are really how I think about using AI. I would never use it to write myself or publish anything that is AI writing. I'm not, besmirching anyone who does that necessarily, as long as they're transparent about it with their audience, but it's just not what my audience expects from me. But I do think that it's a powerful tool that, writers, creatives, people in all roles can use to supercharge their creativity and do bigger and better work than they could before.
Hey, we'll be right back with Joe, but first, I want to share with you an ironic insight about our Story Cycle Genie that I got last week from my former marketing boss and one of my most trusted friends and confidants, Lynn Harper. Now, Lynn is not easily impressed. She was abandoned as a baby and left in a dumpster in Berkeley, California. Her first cries brought rescuers and ultimately a loving home. That voice has been turning heads ever since. Now, she was raised by a white father who passed away when she was just 2 years old and a Jewish mother. And they had a black housekeeper named Roxy who became Lynn's second mom, helping raise her in a home that was as rich in love as it was in culture. She was also taught the samba by Brazilian superstar Carmen Miranda and nominated Most Promising by the Academy of Country and Western Music. Yeah, that's a lot to achieve at a very young age, right? But there's more. Lynn climbed the ranks of Fortune 500 companies, including Gillette, Fabergé, and American Home Products. She ran business and economic development for the governor of Iowa. She built the largest privately owned satellite network in North America. That's where Lynn and I first met. She was San Diego's #1 female radio talk show host. She's a syndicated New York Times columnist, a CNN and MSNBC commentator, and the founder of the fastest growing women's fitness franchise in America. Lynn Harper has pretty much seen everything. So when she experienced the Story Cycle Genie, our AI-powered, and by AI I mean artful intelligence, narrative, native-driven brand story development tool, she told me this, and boy did I listen. She said, quote, "Your Story Cycle Genie is unbelievably good, but that's your marketing problem right there. People won't believe what it can actually do for them." She's right. It sounds too good to be true. So instead of telling you what it does, let the believers tell you.
I got goosebumps when I read it, and I was like, what sorcery is this? Because it actually reflected back to me a lot of the things that we've been working on trying to describe.
I thought it was really great. I didn't see gaps as much as opportunities. It phrased things and described what I do in ways that I hadn't considered.
It was spookily accurate. There were a lot of areas I thought, oh, this is, what is the value proposition evaluation, for instance? Something that also jumped out at me, which I loved, which was the brand archetype assessment. And it said primary, we're the sage. So we've got knowledge and expertise. And I hadn't thought about that in that way. The sage. Secondary, the magician. We're transforming events. Love that description. And then the third, which is really part of our service, is the caregiver. The sage, the magician, the caregiver. These are great takeaways. I love it.
Wow. Gave me the opportunity to try your genie, and it is brilliant. I mean, you just did a wonderful job with that. And I'm not surprised it sort of had that impact.
It was fascinating. It was fun to see, my story translated back into this, system and looking at the archetypes and, my positioning. I was like, oh, am I doing it right? And my narrative. But it very much eye-opening into the importance of story.
I got to tell you, Park, I was blown away by that report, and I think I kept questioning you, like, are you sure that this was generated automatically? It was remarkably insightful about how I try to position myself, and it even, I think, surfaced a couple things that I wouldn't have expected to show up in a report like that. So just very, almost goosebumpy, scary. I couldn't promote it more to people listening. Like, you got to try this thing out. It's really spooky good.
So do you want to see how spooky, scary, good the Story Cycle Genie is with your brand story? Just head on over to storycyclegenie.ai and get your brand story graded for free. Just click on that little red button there, give it your name, your email address, and drop the URL to your brand in there. In under 60 seconds, it's going to give you a grade from A+ to F-, heaven forbid. It'll validate what you're doing well, reveal gaps that you can easily fix, and even inspire you with new ways to think about your brand story. So check it out right now at storycyclegenie.ai. Now, let's get back to Joe. And I love that thought about writing is thinking. And when you write these books, and my experience when I've written mine is you start one trajectory, one thesis, and then you learn something and it changes you as you go. And you learn as much from writing that book as now you're sharing with the people out there. In super skill, what was one of the most surprising findings, insights, aha moments that you just didn't see coming along?
That's a great question. I would point to two things. So one thing that I don't think I expected to be writing about as much in the book as I ended up is really around the power of listening and vulnerability. So the science here is very interesting. It's when we practice active listening. There's this one study from Japan where essentially they put people in an MRI machine and then essentially did like these talk therapy type sessions. And they found that when someone, the therapist outside, the researcher outside, was acting in this therapist role, practiced active listening, right? Sense that I'm listening to your story, I'm responding to it, I'm digging deeper. That actually lit up the parts of the brain that are associated essentially with I really like you, right? Like just the act of listening itself, of listening to someone's story, of being truly engaged with them, is one of the best ways that we can connect with each other. So when we think about the power of storytelling, it's not just storytelling, but also story listening. That's really, really important. Similarly is the power of vulnerability in your storytelling. And there's something called the vulnerability loop. So it's this idea that if I share a vulnerable story or moment in my life with you, you're very likely naturally to detect that, pick up that that is something that I am doing, and naturally reciprocate it back. And then once I get that back from you, I acknowledge it, right? There's this moment of connection, and then the kind of vulnerability loop closes and the stronger trust is established. And it's something that isn't like a woo-woo thing. It's been shown to very quickly deepen relationships over and over again. So there's also this degree of vulnerability in the stories we tell, which is, I think, is something that we kind of inherently know as storytellers, right? But seeing that research play out was really, really surprising in just how kind of proven that it is and how powerful that is as a mechanism. And I think that's more important than ever, where the role of human beings at work will be much more about building connections with other people than necessarily doing a ton of work at a computer as AI gets better at that work. And the third, and maybe the most fun, is the last chapter of the book, where I really dive into some of the experimental AI storytelling possibilities that we're seeing, learning from artists like Holly Herndon, who built an AI version of herself and then essentially commercialized it, right? Like created this spawn of her voice that any of her fans could then use and remix and sing through, and a profit sharing agreement off of that. Grimes, who the popular EDM artist who has a couple of kids with Elon Musk, she did this as well. She developed her kind of like Grimes twin. And I think if you extrapolate that, right, you think about like James Cameron creating a communal avatar universe, right, that fans could remix. Think about this with like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, George Lucas and Star Wars. Like the possibilities are really interesting. And it's also this moment where we have to be thinking about, how can I take advantage of my IP and my ideas before the AI giants just do that for me, right? Before they just steal my content. We all have to be thinking about, how do I kind of own that from an AI perspective? So I built like one AI bot version of me that didn't really work. Now I'm in the process of creating another one, right? Because I'm thinking about like, how can I deepen the book storytelling experience, right? And the way that people can engage with the book in a deeper way using AI. Because God knows the AI models, whether I give permission or not, are going to find a way to ingest my book and allow people to, get the perspective or write like me. So I would rather take that data and train it in an even more deliberate way and own that myself. So that exploration around artists like Herndon was really, really fun. So I'd say those three things were kind of the three moments where I learned something surprising and new.
Yeah. So the Terminator's not coming to kill you, it's coming to swipe your content. And I think we're all dealing with that.
It might swipe your content so it gets smart enough to come back and kill you one day.
And then take you out.
Yeah.
And then the new book, Super Kill, will be appropriate.
Come out. Exactly. It's when AI turns us all into paper clips and takes over the publishing industry. And we're just binding the manuscripts of ChatGPT and Claude.
Yeah. Well, you are obviously a Kurt Vonnegut fan, and I love his little video, The Shapes of Stories, where he takes you through Cinderella. And I really like his short, concise description of a story. He says, a story is a man gets in a hole, a man gets out of a hole. It needn't be about a man, and it needn't be about a hole.
Yeah.
People love that story. And I share that. And, I do a lot of training with leaders and brand developers and so forth. And I'm just curious if you've come across this too, relative to your book, Super Skill, in that you cover lots of different story spines, story structures, the hero's journey, so on and so forth. And I have found in my travels, most people I'm speaking with, especially leaders, are like, don't trouble me with the story theory. Just show me what works. And I'm curious if you come across that too.
Yeah, I think it's about the framing of it, right? Because what works is understanding those foundational shapes and structures of narrative, or else you're just sort of rambling forever, as some CEOs are wont to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I always find that with a lot of folks like that the science of storytelling and how storytelling plays in our brain is often a good avenue in for welcoming them into this world, right? Because it kind of presents this rational basis for what stories are doing and why they work. So even when I talk about the shapes of stories and why they work, I talk about the visuospatial processing that happens when we actually draw our stories out and how that helps us internalize it much more effectively, right? And learn these skills a lot faster. So even when we think about those shapes, there is actually a real science to what Vonnegut is teaching. Funny enough, too, something I write about in the book is that researchers put all of basically the top literature of the last 100 years through a machine learning model a few years ago. And they discovered that Vonnegut was actually right about his shapes of stories being the universal shapes of stories. That when you started to map them out, they basically just looked like Vonnegut shapes. And this was a theory, if people don't know, Vonnegut shapes of stories is a theory that he came up with as an anthropology student at the University of Chicago in the 1940s, right after he got out of World War II. And he wanted to write about this as his thesis, this theory that he had that all of the great stories of Western literature essentially followed a few fundamental shapes. Vonnegut ended up coming up with 8 in all, although a couple are very similar. So you could say it's more like 6. And his thesis idea got rejected. And at that point, he said, screw it. And he became one of the world's first content marketers at GE, writing about their technology, which introduced him to all of the nerdy tech stuff that would help him write Player's Piano, which was his first novel, and then really take off from there. But then he would teach these shapes when he would lecture at different colleges over the years. And I discovered that video like when on early YouTube when I was in college and absolutely loved it. But then when researchers actually looked at it, he was totally right because, of course he was. He's Kurt Vonnegut. He's the best.
Well, and they all basically follow that same pattern of get in a hole, get out of a hole, which is the hero's journey. It's the same thing. Get in lots of holes and get out of them. And what do you learn from that,
Yeah, it's really, instead of a hole, it's the abyss. We're kind of going on the same journey. Also boy, slight variations of that, right? Boy meets girl, which is up, down, up. Mm-hmm. We got Cinderella. From bad to worse is maybe the hardest one to pull off, which is just things are bad. and they go to worse. That's Kafka. That's the metamorphosis. That's some dark shit right there. A little bit harder to turn that into a viral LinkedIn post. But man, the whole boy meets girl, which again need not be about a boy, need not be about a girl, but is just a rise fall rise pattern. Like if you start to actually use these, it just helps you see like how punchy, how fast is your narrative. You need to combine it with like the core elements of what make a story powerful, which a lot of the research I've done with the companies like NeuroInsight to determine relatability, ease, novelty, and tension is what I write about in the book. So it's not everything, right? But I do find that if you kind of frame it in the right way for them and have them actually practice it and like come up with a story and then see how that plays out on LinkedIn, or another platform where they might have an audience, that's where you kind of get the breakthrough. But maybe I've just been lucky. Maybe your experience has been different there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times I'm working with non-content creators. A lot of, leadership, communication internally and so forth. And they're just a lot of times will push back and say, look, I don't have time for a story. I'm not really comfortable, telling a story. Give me some frameworks that I can use to get my messages across. And in doing that, then all of a sudden the stories start coming alive in them. And I'm like, there's a story. You can tell that story right there. And I go, okay.
So you have to tell them that it's a framework and not a story. They're in a storytelling workshop and they're like,
interestingly enough,
I don't want to tell any stories.
But just like you said, where you've got to appeal to first their rational logic brain and say, this is a framework and here's how it works. Here is quantifiable data that demonstrates engagement rates and so forth. And it's the first one I start with the and, but, therefore. And statement of agreement, but here's the problem we got to solve in order to, fulfill that statement of agreement. Therefore, here's the way forward. They get that. They're like, okay, I've got that. Now let me show it to you in a written memo. Let me show it to you online. Let me in a landing page or whatever. Now all you've learned here is that setup, problem resolution, the three basic acts of story structure. Now let's expand on that. Let me show you the 5 primal elements of a short story, an anecdote that is an expanded and, but, therefore, a story that you can tell in under a minute that makes your business point for you. And then it always leads to, well, this is always great, Park. I'm not comfortable telling stories. Nobody wants to hear my stories. So then I've got to reframe it one more time and say, don't think about it as a story. Just take us to a moment in time when something changed, something happened that plays to the setup, problem resolution that makes your business point for you. Give me a time stamp, a location stamp. You might be the center of the story. Tell it so your audience is living vicariously through you. What happened? What was the big surprise? Did things go south? How did you fix it or whatever? That then illustrates the point you're trying to make. Oh, I could tell you about what happened last June and blah, 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 and down in Tallahassee, blah, blah, blah. Take me to that very moment. They tell the moment I said, there you go. You just told a story.
Right. I love that. I might steal some of that from you. That's great.
Oh, you can take any and all of it. But yeah, it was interestingly enough, Joe, I was teaching a very successful medical device sales team in Chicago. And there was like 65 of them, and I had their attention over the course of several months doing these trainings. And the sponsor came back to me one day and said, towards the beginning, that these people are really intimidated by the word story. And I'm like, really? I mean, these are like top level salespeople. You would just think it would have been more innate, more intuitive with them. And so we made the decision with the sponsor that day, a huge learning experience for me, is I said, let's not talk about it as a story. Let's talk about it as a moment in time that makes their business point for them. Tell that story. Use the ABT framework. We'll expand it a little bit. Then all of a sudden they just like bubbled with stories. Oh yeah, I can tell you about this. And then when it was all said and done, I said, well, you all just told me a bunch of stories, even though you're not storytellers.
That's very clever. I love it.
It's wild. So what are 1, 2, or 3 things that people have yet to read, super skills, could take away right now, advice you would give them about their storytelling and AI and what they can do right now just to help themselves out?
So I'd say to start, right, the overall way that you should think about your skills moving forward, no matter what role that you're in. Like, this isn't just for marketers or creators, if you're in accounting, finance, etc. Like, what we know is that AI is going to continue to get better at technical tasks. That's a lot of what we do when we're sitting at a desk working on a computer, right? So we have to think about those strong relational skills of building connections with other people, leading, collaborating, teamwork, right? Rallying stakeholders around a vision. Like, those relational skills are what's going to make us valuable at work. And if you really understand the behavioral science, neuroscience of storytelling that I map out in the book, storytelling just naturally acts as a super skill for us that makes us better at all of those surrounding soft skills. This is an evolutionary trait, right? It's how we went from being a mid-rate species wandering the earth to ultra-social learning machines. We were able to work in groups that were bigger than our hunter-gatherer tribes, overcome Dunbar's number, which is essentially this limit of we can only really know 200 250 people and trust them because we get rallied together around shared narratives, right? This is what makes religions, this is what makes nations, this is what makes hometowns, is the sense that we are bonded by story. So even if you're skeptical of storytelling, that the science is there and it is this powerful thing, and it doesn't have to be actually intimidating. As a child, you spent your days telling stories. I think if you just pay attention for one day of how much of your life is spent telling stories to other human beings, telling these moments in time, perhaps, as you said, Park, if you won't want to think about it in terms of stories, little anecdotes, right? Things that happen in your day, you'll find that it's actually much of your waking life and the vast majority of the time that you spent interacting with other people. That's the story. It's to not be intimidated by it. And I think that we're often told now that AI is the most important thing that we can learn at work. And I'm a proponent of learning AI. I think it's an important skill, but we're also in this age where learning AI alone isn't what's going to save you in the next stage of work. These tools are getting easier and easier to use. You know, a couple of years ago, using ChatGPT or Anthropic felt like conjuring a magic genie and trying to figure out what was the incantation that would get it to operate correctly. If I tell ChatGPT that it's a bad boy, is that going to make it stop hallucinating? You know, we're all trying to guess these different magic prompts that would make it work. And now it's starting to work much more effectively, and it's much more usable as an actual work product than it was before. And I think that's how it's going to progress, right? In a couple of years, using AI is going to kind of feel like using Google or knowing Microsoft Word or Excel, or the things that used to list on our resume in the early 2000s that now seem really, really silly. But if you kind of invest in your core storytelling superpowers, use this to think, to communicate, to write, right? Then you use AI as an amplifier on top of that, you're going to be much more effective. But the most effective people using AI we already see are people who can communicate really well, who can articulate their ideas and what they want to accomplish, which is all of what storytelling enables, is for us to become fundamentally better communicators, right? And then you in turn actually can use AI much more effectively if you just master that one core skill, because increasingly using AI is just talking to it in natural language. I'll walk around talking to Claude just on voice mode because it's gotten better and better in that way. So think about these skills together. And then on just a pure storytelling point, like, as you said, storytelling can feel intimidating, but there is a real fundamental science to this stuff that anyone can pick up on. It's just these core elements that I mentioned earlier, of starting with relatability, right? We're drawn to stories where we can see ourselves in that character, where it's a situation that we felt like we're in before. And so just simply presenting a character, a situation that you know your audience can relate to, is just one of the easiest hacks to telling an engaging story. Ease, so breaking down the barrier between you and your audience, is crucial. And so much this is thinking about those first few seconds that you have with someone. We don't actually have shorter attention spans than we used to. A big meta-analysis from the University of Vienna found that actually our ability to concentrate on tasks attentionally has increased over the last 30 years, but our consideration span is much shorter because we're constantly promised this next piece of content or story or entertainment in the roulette wheel of our phones. We tend to only consider things for 1, 2, 3 seconds. So really obsessing over the hooks of the story you tell. How do you open a curiosity gap that your audience wants to engage in? That's the biggest thing if you want to start engaging people more online and building an audience that you can get really, really good at. Like obsess over that first line of dialogue, that first action. Research shows that like showing people, for instance, immediately introducing a character, quick action, motion, presenting a question or problem or a fact that makes you want to learn more. That's really the key to gaining and winning someone's attention. It's true even in real life, right? Where we often maybe have more than 3 seconds, but no more than 30 seconds before someone starts checking Slack or looking at their phone. And then novelty, introduce new ideas. Our brains are programmed to notice when we have new things in our environment. So think back when we were hunter-gatherer tribes, food sources, threats in our environment, our brain gets a little hit of dopamine when we notice a novel image or experience. This is true in storytelling as well. So new ideas, new visceral imagery, right? That really gets people's attention. And then tension. Don't be afraid of tension in your storytelling. Tension is what makes a story a story, the gap between what is and what could be. That is what makes a story a story. So many businesses are allergic to it, but don't just have a case study where everything was great for the customer. They signed the contract. Everything went well. No one really believes that story, right? Talk about the challenges that they went through with your company. How did you help them overcome it? What were the barriers internally, externally? What problems did you face? Because that's what makes me actually trust you, right? To hear about that real story where there were stakes, there was tension, things weren't always great, but you got through it together. Because that's what makes me believe that you're going to be the type of partner that's going to be with me through the good times and the bad. So like embrace that tension in your own journey. It can't just be, I went to high school, I went to college, I got straight A's, I got a job, everything was great. You're putting people to sleep. Talk about the challenges that you had to overcome. So if you really embrace those elements and practice them, you're just going to get better and better at storytelling. And don't put the pressure on yourself that, oh, this has to work immediately. Like I think if you start creating content online, especially, like give yourself a year before you expect any sort of results. At that point, you're just figuring stuff out. But this practice also doesn't have to be public. You don't have to be a LinkedIn thought leader or influencer. Decide to open a team meeting every week by sharing a story from your life to build a deeper connection with your team. When you're doing a quarterly presentation, start with a customer story instead of just data to engage your audience off the bat. Just find those small ways that you can integrate storytelling into the way that you work, and you're going to see the power that storytelling has. And I think it's such a gift, right? Park, I'm sure you've experienced this, that once you see that power of storytelling, you can't unsee it. And I think it changes the way that you experience and interact with the world that are really, really just wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I like to call it the applied science and bewitchery of storytelling, because the
I like
applied
that.
science are these algorithms. You know, these structures you talk about in super skill, those are algorithms. And I like to also think that storytelling is like the very first technology we Homo sapiens really ever had, because stories are the software that drive the hardware of our limbic meaning-making machine. And I find it so ironic that the very first technology of storytelling is what, as you talk about in super skills, is how you overcome the synthetic, the halitosis bot breath of AI. You know, a technology that everyone's fearing, and yet we still have this very innate, intuitive technology inside of us as storytellers. We're the only beings we know of that think, plan, organize, and act in story.
Yeah, at least that we know of. Dolphins could be
It's
telling stories
fascinating.
to each other, perhaps. I
That's
always
true.
wonder about that. We don't fully know, but yeah, it really is what separates us from apes, right? Is that storytelling technology. I love the way that Rucker Bregman puts that idea in the book Humankind. He talks about comparing us to Neanderthals back when we coexisted 80,000 years ago, more like 40,000 years ago. And essentially Neanderthals had bigger brains than us. They were stronger, but they didn't have nearly the same capacity for language and storytelling as human beings. And storytelling is what allowed us to drive so much more connection and pass down lessons to each other. So he says that Neanderthals were like a, MacBook Pro, but without Wi-Fi. Humans were like I think a MacBook Air, but with Wi-Fi because we had that connection. And if you think about it, like the math actually works out as experiments. I think it's Joseph Heinrich that did this study. But if you have a Neanderthal who is, likely to learn how to fish, a really big breakthrough for his society, only 1 out of 10 times. And a human, say by comparison, is less intelligent, is only going to figure out 1 out of every 100 times. But if the Neanderthal has a social group of only like its cave roommate, right? That's the only person it can teach how to fish. But a human has an entire tribe of like 20, 25 people that it can teach how to fish. All the humans are going to learn how to fish much faster than all the Neanderthals. And that's an example that I love just to kind of illustrate the way that storytelling acts as that cognitive technology, that Wi-Fi that allows us to learn things much faster and to grow and progress together.
Well, I was laughing at that, the whole Homo sapien Neanderthal thing. I think the very first story ever told that created a reaction out of Larry, that cave mate out in the savannah somewhere. Larry goes, uh-huh, uh-oh, aha, set up, problem, resolution, learned through the use of story, which made the Homo sapien the most aggressive, invasive species this planet has ever known.
Yeah, for good and bad. Maybe AI is the next alien species that's gonna, take the cake there, take over that mantle.
Yeah. So you now are the CMO over at Pepper after Contently. What is Pepper? And then let's talk about the quick little brand story that we created through our Story Cycle Genie.
Yeah. Let me bring that back up. My Chrome quit. But Pepper, thinking of herself as an AI native organic growth company. So the idea is that, simple terms, right? We work with brands to understand how to drive organic growth, bringing together expert network of human creators with AI agents to solve for discoverability and AI search, social, SEO, right? And allow you to grow by creating great content that engages people and creates a positive impression of your brand. So working off the thesis, right, that attention is harder and harder to buy. Organic is really where it's at, but how can we do this in a much more efficient and effective way than we ever have before? We believe that combining specialized expert talent, great human storytellers with using AI intelligently is the way that you unlock that growth.
Yeah, very cool. So as I do with all my guests, is I took the Pepper website, fed it to our Story Cycle Genie. In about 2 minutes, it gave me a brand assessment. And not knowing your brand intimately, I said, okay, what I've read and what I see here, I feel like it's 90% accurate. Go ahead and then create the brand narrative strategy. And in about another 4 minutes, it created that 8-page document I sent over to you that says, here is how Pepper is showing up in the world. And it follows our Story Cycle system, which of course was inspired by the hero's journey, but mapped to business. And then in the Genie at its core is the and, but, therefore story structure. So it thinks, organizes, plans, and acts in story for brand development. What did you think of the outcome of what you got?
Yeah, it was pretty damn accurate. I was surprised. I think you nailed it. Maybe that means there's still improvements I want to be making to the website. It's a new website, but it seems like at least the narrative is getting across well. I'd say a little bit. There's maybe some tweaks we can do to the audience personas that probably more the fault of the website than your tool. Mostly the third one, the enterprise CMO is right on. SEO content director is right on. We often find growth directors kind of as a core constituency for us as well. But it was really strong. Brand archetypes, I think we're pretty right on. Yeah, this is a great little tool. I'd like to try it with some of our competitors maybe to see how we stack up.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the Genie, we do have a brand intelligence Genie where you can go in and feed it any of your competitors, and it knows you because you build a brand brain inside of it, and it will tell you, it'll give you a complete report on validating what you're doing well, where you're beating them, reveals the gaps that you can easily fix, and even inspires you with new ways to think about telling your story, to maybe own some white space out there that neither you nor your competitor currently own. How you
I
can
love
take
that.
that over.
We have to play
Yeah.
around with that. That sounds super
Yeah.
fun.
And then you can also go to the Genie and you can test your brand story for free. You just do the brand story grader. It'll give you A+ to F- grade, depending on how well you're showing up, at a 14-point brand story assessment on what's working, what's not, and how you can fix that. So you can do that with any of your competitors, put it in there, and it's quite accurate. And you can tell them who's doing a good job and who's not.
Oh, amazing. Let me just get on there and really just bankrupt you through API calls.
Well, yeah, that won't be that. Those don't cost a whole lot for that. That's great. But what we did is just simply took my process. It usually took 2 to 3 months of brand story development and built a Genie out of it using AI. And now people can do the process in under an hour, literally.
Wow.
And instead of paying 30 grand for it, it might cost you $50.
Super, super cool.
Yeah.
Practicing witchcraft over there, Park.
Well, the applied science and bewitchery of storytelling, but it is totally infused with these story structures. So it, like I said, thinks, plans, organizes, and acts with you, always with narrative at the core of its guidance. Now, anyways, yeah, you'll have to check it out.
I will. I definitely will.
All right, man. Where people can get your book on Amazon and any place else, where should we send them to learn more about you, get your newsletter, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity for a plug. So you can subscribe to my Substack newsletter at storytellingedge.substack.com. We'll also give you guys a special discount offer on something I'm running right now around the launch, which is a special discount around getting a bundle if you subscribe to the paid version of my newsletter, which gets you a personalized signed copy of Super Skill. It gets you access to my Storytelling in the AI Age course. It gets you dope socks if you live in the continental US. It gets you access to virtual and live events that I'll be hosting throughout the year, as well as live office hours for me if you want to talk storytelling and content strategy. So I'll give a special 20% discount for the very special listeners of the Business of Story show. Very active on LinkedIn, which is, I mean, sometimes embarrassing to admit, but come to kind of like LinkedIn and have a pretty big audience there. So you can find me on LinkedIn.
Wait. Why is it embarrassing to admit? I
mean, like, you ever try and tell Gen Z people that you work with that you post on LinkedIn multiple times a day? It's like a little bit of shame that comes there. But I feel like my LinkedIn feed has gotten a little bit less AI parably. Maybe it's because I just keep saying, stop showing this to me every time I get it on LinkedIn, and just have some great people who engage in my content there. So I'd love for you to join them. It's where you can discover my stuff, my videos. Also, I have a podcast called The Art of the Zag that you can find on my Substack with bestselling author Shane Snow, where we explore counterintuitive ideas and people that are winning in business and in life by zagging when everyone else is zigging. So we can include that link as well if you don't mind, Park. But yeah, please check out my stuff. You don't have to subscribe right away, but get a little taste for what I do, and hopefully you like it.
Awesome. Well, I love your book. It's one of the best books on storytelling I've read in several years, and the fact of how you tackle AI and bring it into the center ring with storytelling, folks, I'd really highly recommend you pick it up. So I appreciate you giving our listeners that special offer.
Thanks, Park. Appreciate the kind words.
Thanks, Joe. Have a good one.
You too.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. And if you liked what you heard, please share it with anyone you know who would benefit from Joe's wisdom. And if you would jump over to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your shows and give us a rating and review, man, I would really appreciate it. And if you have yet to test the strength of your brand story, do it right now at StoryCycleGenie.ai. You're going to love it. Now, I hope you'll join me next Monday when Nick Jane, co-founder of Eagle Rock CFO Services, will be here, and he asked the question, what story are you telling yourself about cash flow and profit, and why you might need a new story if you want to achieve the financial success you're looking for? So be here for that show, and until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make that one epic.